It was a chilly, gray morning when a man walked into a busy city park, looking as though life had worn him down. His clothes were tattered, shoes barely holding together, but his eyes held something rare, a flicker of hope, in a world where most people are too focused on their own lives to notice anyone else. This man was about to cross paths with someone who would change his life forever. The park was full of the usual sounds: children laughing and playing, leaves rustling in the wind, and the hum of people rushing past, lost in their busy schedules. But among the crowd, one person stood out, a man whose appearance didn't fit the scene. With a cap pulled low, his face was partially hidden, and he seemed out of place. People walked by without giving him a second glance, but for some reason, there was something about him that made you pause and wonder. This man, forgotten by the world, was about to have a moment that would not only change his life, but also someone else's. He approached a bench where BarronTrump sat. Barron, dressed sharply, looked like someone who had everything: wealth, status, and a future full of promise. He seemed to be lost in his own thoughts, unaware of the man who had just sat down next to him. What happened next would be unexpected and surprising, changing the course of their lives forever. The unexpected request. The homeless man, sitting beside Barron, didn't ask for just any kind of help. He asked for $100, a sum that seemed so simple. Yet behind his request was a story that none of them could have anticipated. As Barron turned to look at the man, the first thing he noticed was the vulnerability in his eyes. For a moment, it felt like time slowed down. The homeless man wasn't just asking for money. He was sharing a piece of his soul. His life had been hard, marked by struggles and loss. But there was something about the way he spoke that made Barron pause. This wasn't just a man asking for a handout. It was a man asking for understanding, for someone to see beyond the surface. The park's noises faded away as the two men locked eyes. Barron listened, and the words the homeless man spoke weren't just about money. They were about survival, about dreams long lost, and about a belief that kindness could still be found in the world. Why his request was so much more. The reason the homeless man asked for $100 wasn't just because he needed it. It was because he had a plan. He didn't want the money to buy food or shelter. Instead, he had a vision. He wanted to start over. He wanted to find work, get back on his feet, and rebuild a life that had once seemed full of possibilities. For Barron, the moment was jarring. The world he lived in had always been full of opportunities, and problems were often things that could be solved with money or connections. But this man, standing before him, didn't want just a quick fix. He wanted something more meaningful, a chance at a fresh start. And as Barron looked into his eyes, he realized something important. We're all just one decision, one act of kindness, away from changing someone's life forever. It wasn't the $100 that mattered most. It was the moment, the connection they shared, that would define what came next. What started as a simple request for money became the beginning of a bigger story. A story that proved that sometimes all it takes is seeing someone for who they really are to change everything. The man standing at the edge of the park didn't always live like this. He hadn't always been a stranger to the streets, with clothes tattered and shoes too worn to protect him from the cold. There was a time when David had a family, a home, and a future. He had once been just like the people walking past him, heading somewhere with purpose. But life had a way of knocking him off course. David grew up in a small town where everything felt familiar. The streets were quiet, and neighbors actually knew each other's names. He lived with his mother, a hard-working waitress who juggled long hours and endless responsibilities, and his father, a man full of promises, but lacking the will to follow through. While David's mother always tried to make him feel loved, his father's presence was more of a burden than a blessing. His father's anger flared easily, and when things didn't go as planned, he would lash out or withdraw completely. By the time David was 16, his father left, vanishing without a trace. That loss hurt deeply. It wasn't just the absence of his father, it was the hole it left in David's sense of security. His mother, though loving, could only do so much. She worked tirelessly, coming home exhausted, but still managing to cook his favorite meal, baked chicken and mashed potatoes, whenever she could. David tried to help, taking on odd jobs like mowing lawns or delivering newspapers. But no matter how hard he worked, it never felt like enough. As he grew older, the weight of survival began to crush him. Dreams of becoming a mechanic were pushed aside as the daily struggle to make ends meet took over. At 23, David left home, hoping for a fresh start in the city. He was drawn to the promise of opportunity, but the reality was far from what he expected. Instead of finding steady work, he found himself stuck in a cycle of dead-end jobs with low wages and constant disappointment. The harder he tried, the further behind he fell. David's situation worsened over time. He lost his job at the diner, fell behind on rent, and soon found himself living on the streets. The city's hustle and bustle, once full of promise, now felt overwhelming and isolating. The blaring horns, the distant sirens, the rush of people walking by, these noises became his new rhythm, but they didn't bring comfort. Instead, they reminded him how alone he felt. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. David's clothes became even more worn, his shoes barely functional, and his hope began to fade. The hardest part wasn't the physical struggle, it was the emotional toll. He hadn't spoken to his mother in over a year. His pride kept him from reaching out, even though he longed to hear her voice again. He had no friends, no support system, and often felt like he didn't exist to the people around him. But something felt different today. As he wandered through the park, he noticed a crowd gathered around BarronTrump. The young man seemed to have it all. Money, fame, opportunities, everything David had once dreamed of. He had seen Barron on TV and heard about him in the news, but today something shifted. David didn't know what it was, but a small spark of hope flickered inside him. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the day that changed everything. David had little left, just a few dollars in his pocket, most of which were set aside for a cheap meal. But he didn't need that money for himself. He needed it for his mother. She had always been there for him, even if she didn't know where he was now. In her heart, she was the one person who believed in him, and he couldn't keep living this way. With that thought in mind, David took a deep breath and walked up to Barron, his heart racing. He didn't know what to say or how Barron would respond, but he knew one thing for sure. This moment could be the turning point he had been waiting for. What started as a simple request for help, $100, would lead to a conversation that neither of them could have predicted. David wasn't just asking for money, he was asking for a chance to change his life, to reclaim the dreams that had long been buried. It was a bold request, but it was the truth that made it so powerful. David's heart pounded as he took a few steps closer to BarronTrump. His hands, rough from street life, trembled slightly. He had been sure about what he needed to say when he first walked into the park, but now, standing in front of the young man with everything he could ever dream of, the words escaped him. The crowd around Barron was laughing and chatting. Smartphones raced to capture the moment, and David felt out of place. He wasn't even sure why he was here. He could see Barron was wrapped up in his own world, too busy to notice someone like him. But he had to try. Maybe, just maybe, today could be different. David inhaled deeply, trying to steady his nerves, and approached Barron. He stood a little to the side, making sure not to intrude on the group of people gathered around the young man. Barron's eyes darted from one person to the next, a quick flicker of recognition passing across his face when they locked eyes. David couldn't place it. Was it curiosity or something else? Either way, it was enough to make him take a step forward. "Excuse me." David's voice was shaky, but it held the weight of everything he had been carrying. I know this sounds crazy, but could you help me out?" Barron raised an eyebrow, his gaze sweeping over David's worn clothes and tired face. "Help you out? With what?" David's throat tightened, and his mind scrambled for the right words. "I don't have much, but I've been trying to get something for my mother. She's all I've got left, and I can't do it alone anymore. Could you spare $100 just to get me started?" The words came out in a rush, faster than he intended. His heart hammered, the anxiety rising. What if Barron laughed? What if he ignored him? The tension hung in the air, and for a moment, nothing happened. Barron just stood there, staring, his face unreadable. David could feel every second dragging on, waiting for a response. Then Barron did something David wasn't expecting. He didn't dismiss him. Instead, he studied him, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. "I didn't expect you to ask for money," Barron said slowly, his voice calm but thoughtful. "But you seem like you really need help. I can't give you 100 right now, but I can get you something to eat." David's heart skipped a beat, and the weight in his chest began to lift. $100 was more than he had hoped for, but food would help. "I'd appreciate anything," David replied, his voice quieter now, the relief seeping through. Without hesitation, Barron reached into his wallet and pulled out a few crumpled bills, handing them over to David with a quiet, simple gesture. "I know it's not much," Barron said, "but I think you'll make better use of it than I would." David blinked, momentarily stunned. He had expected a quick rejection, maybe even laughter, but this was different. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the dignity with which Barron treated him. Barron didn't brush him off. He didn't make him feel small. He looked at him, truly saw him. David stood there for a long moment, unable to find the words. This wasn't what he had imagined. He had thought he would be disappointed, but instead, something shifted inside him. Gratitude rushed in, flooding him like a wave. The hopelessness he had carried for so long began to loosen its grip on him, just a little. It felt like his self-worth was returning, bit by bit. "Thank you," David finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll make sure to use it for something good, I promise." Barron offered a faint smile, a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I'm sure you will. Take care of yourself." David watched as Barron walked away, the crowd slowly returning to their usual chatter and phone screens. For David, though, the world had changed. It wasn't the life-altering sum he had hoped for, but it was something just as important: recognition. A stranger had seen him, had treated him with respect, and offered him help when he least expected it. As David walked away from the park, the crumpled bills in his pocket felt heavier than their actual worth. It wasn't the amount that mattered, it was the gesture. Someone had cared enough to step outside their world and acknowledge his. That alone was enough to spark hope in his heart again. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was a step, and for David, hope was all he needed to take the next one. David couldn't believe what he was holding in his hand. The crumpled bills, handed to him by BarronTrump, felt heavier than they should have. Not because of the amount, enough for a meal, maybe more, but because of what it represented. In a world that had turned its back on him, Barron's small act of kindness felt like a lifeline. But what David didn't know, as he walked away with his heart racing and his thoughts tangled, was that this moment was just the beginning of something he could never have predicted. As David rounded the corner, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost ignored it, too caught up in his emotions. But something made him check. His stomach dropped when he saw the message. It wasn't from his mother, who hadn't reached out in months. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "David, this is BarronTrump. I've been thinking about our conversation. I want to help you. Meet me at the old diner on 5th at 8 p.m. tonight. We can talk more." David froze, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Barron, the man with everything, offering to help him. It didn't add up. Was this some sort of prank, a misunderstanding? Maybe it was a mistake, but something inside him told him not to overthink it. He had nothing to lose by showing up. The hours leading up to 8 p.m. were a blur. David's thoughts kept racing, questioning what Barron could possibly want from him. Why would he want to help? And why now? When he finally arrived at the diner, its neon lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. Inside, the smell of fried food and coffee filled the air, grounding him in the moment. Barron was already there, sitting at a booth with a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up as David approached, his expression calm but serious, a faint sincerity in his eyes. "David," Barron said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Please, sit down." David hesitated for a moment before sliding into the booth. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready for whatever came next. Barron took a breath, like he was choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. I know what it's like to feel stuck, like the world's against you. People see the fame, the money, but they don't see the struggles. You said you were trying to do something for your mom, right? David nodded, his mind still spinning. He wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but he was starting to feel a flicker of hope. Barron's gaze softened. I want to help you. Not just with money, but with a real chance. I know people who could give you a job. Something you can build on. Something you deserve. David blinked in disbelief. You're offering me a job? Barron nodded. It's more than just a job. It's an opportunity to change your life. I'm not giving you a handout. I'm giving you a shot. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise it will be real. David's chest tightened. This was more than he ever expected. For years, he had believed his life was a series of mistakes, that no one cared about people like him. But here was Barron, offering a lifeline. The diner seemed quieter now, the low murmur of voices fading into the background. Barron leaned forward, his tone more serious. But there's a catch. David's heart dropped. A catch? What could be worse than what he was already living through? You have to commit, Barron continued. You can't just take the help and walk away. This is a chance, but you've got to fight for it. You can't back down. David felt a surge of panic. What was he signing up for? He wasn't sure he was ready for this kind of pressure. But then, his mother's words echoed in his mind. Don't give up on yourself. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. Okay, David said, his voice shaky but determined. I'll do it. Barron smiled slightly, a look of approval in his eyes. Good. You're not alone in this, David. There are people who want to see you succeed. As Barron explained the next steps, David understood that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be no shortcuts, no quick fixes. But for the first time in a long time, David saw a clear path. He had a chance, real work, real opportunity. However, just as he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to turn around, the unexpected twist came. Later that night, as David was walking back to the small corner where he usually slept, he felt a sudden hand grab his shoulder. Spinning around, he found himself face to face with a man in a suit, someone he didn't recognize. You're David, right? The man asked, his voice flat, professional. David nodded warily. The man didn't smile. I need to talk to you about BarronTrump. He's been watching you. You've been selected for something much bigger than you think. David's stomach twisted. What did that mean? What was Barron really offering him? And what was this man talking about? As the man disappeared into the night, David stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. What was the catch? What was Barron's true plan? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain. Everything had just changed, and David had no idea what kind of future lay ahead, but he knew it wouldn't be the same as it had been. Whatever was coming, he had to be ready for it. David's life changed in ways he never saw coming. After that strange encounter with the man in the suit, his world began to spin in directions he couldn't have predicted. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and meetings, each one more surreal than the last. What had started as a small act of kindness from BarronTrump turned into something far bigger, something David was only beginning to understand. A new beginning. David quickly realized that the something bigger Barron mentioned wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to build a real future. It wasn't going to be easy, though. Barron's words echoed in his mind. This isn't just about work. It's about transforming yourself, about becoming someone better than you were. David's first day at the new job was a wake-up call. The office buzzed with energy, full of people who seemed to have it all figured out. He felt like an outsider, like he didn't belong. But when the receptionist smiled and led him to his desk, it hit him. This wasn't just about earning a paycheck. This was a chance to change his life. The struggles and small victories. The first few weeks weren't easy. Every task, every new challenge felt like a test of his abilities and his character. He battled with self-doubt, hearing the nagging voice in his head telling him he wasn't good enough, that he didn't deserve this opportunity. But with each small victory, a project finished early, praise from a colleague, trust from a supervisor, David started to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Barron kept his word. He didn't just offer the job and walk away. He checked in regularly, offering advice, encouragement, and sometimes a tough but helpful critique. But what stuck with David were the words Barron said at unexpected times. "You're not here by accident, David. You're here because you can do more than you think." The power of connection. As time went on, David started to see just how much he was growing. It wasn't just about doing the work. It was about learning who he was and what he could become. He saw others in the office who had their own struggles and dreams. One afternoon, Maria, a colleague, shared her story during lunch. "You're not the only one who's been given a second chance. I've been where you are, but sometimes you have to work for it. Life doesn't just hand you what you want. You have to earn it." Her words hit David hard. He had been given a chance, yes, but it was up to him to make it count. A shift at home. Back at home, David's mother began to notice the change in him. The man who had once caused her endless worry was now someone she could be proud of. One evening, she hugged him and said, "I knew you could do it, David. I knew you'd find your way." It was a moment of pride and reassurance that David hadn't realized he needed. But his transformation wasn't just personal. The lessons he had learned at work began to spill over into his life outside the office. He started giving back. He began mentoring others who were struggling, offering help to those who were in situations just like his. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes, it felt like he was giving more than he was receiving. But with every person he helped, he found more purpose in his own life. Full circle. A moment of reflection. One afternoon, as David sat in a quiet park, reflecting on everything that had happened, it hit him just how far he had come. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who asked for help, the one who felt like he had no place in the world. But now, as he watched children playing and people strolling by, he saw things differently. He saw the world as a place full of possibility, where people didn't just take, they gave. David realized that his transformation wasn't just about getting a job or reaching career milestones. It was about learning to believe in himself and understanding the ripple effect of kindness. It was about knowing that no one, no matter how far they've fallen, is ever beyond hope. And most importantly, it was about realizing that sometimes the greatest act of kindness is offering others the chance to succeed, just as Barron had done for him. The ripple effect. As he thought about Barron, the man who had ignited this change, David understood that what had seemed like a random act of kindness was, in fact, the beginning of something far greater. Barron hadn't just given him a job, he had given him the opportunity to rebuild his life. And now, David was paying it forward, helping others who had been in his shoes. There would still be challenges ahead. Life wasn't going to be smooth sailing. But David knew one thing for sure. With every obstacle, there was an opportunity to grow, to become better, and to make a difference in the lives of others. David was no longer the broken man he once was. He was someone who believed in second chances. And now, he was helping others find theirs. David's journey wasn't just a personal victory. It's a story about the potential we all have, waiting for the right moment to ignite. Sometimes, all it takes is one small act of kindness to change everything. In a world filled with distractions, it's easy to forget that our actions, no matter how small, can have a lasting impact. David's story reminds us that no matter where we come from or what we've been through, we all have the ability to rise and make a difference, both for ourselves and others. The ripple effect of kindness. It's easy to dismiss the power of small gestures, but as David's story shows, even the simplest acts, like giving someone a meal or offering a chance, can change the trajectory of a life. When BarronTrump gave David the opportunity to prove himself, it wasn't just about a job offer. It was about giving him a belief in his own worth, something David hadn't had for years. What if we could take a page out of Barron's book? What if, like David, we chose to believe that we are capable of more than we think? David's transformation was sparked by a single act of kindness, and the ripple effect reached far beyond him. It wasn't just about his career. It was about him becoming someone who could help others rise, too. How your small act can change everything. Imagine what could happen if you decided to step up for someone else. It doesn't have to be something big. Maybe it's offering support to a struggling friend, lending a hand to a colleague, or even taking a moment to believe in your own potential. These small steps could lead to something greater than you ever expected. David's story proves that life is full of second chances, but sometimes those chances don't just come to us. They're created through our actions. By offering help to others, we also help ourselves. We become part of something bigger, something more meaningful, taking action today. So here's the question. What can you do today to make a difference? How can your actions, no matter how small, lead to a ripple effect that changes someone's life? David's story isn't unique. It's a reminder that we all have the ability to make an impact, whether it's through a kind word, lending a hand, or simply believing in someone else. We all have the power to inspire change. I challenge you to think about it. What act of kindness can you perform today? Who can you lift up, inspire, or encourage? Your actions, no matter how big or small, could be the turning point someone else needs. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, comment, and share it. Let's keep the momentum going and inspire others to embrace their own potential. Together, we can make the world a little brighter, one act of kindness at a time.